to border, coast to coast. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Thanks for joining us. We got a great show for you today. It's kind of a head shaker. I mean, I talk about these head snaps, these jaw dropper. This is one because it's science fiction meeting reality. If you'd asked me, if you just made this up and run it by me, I'd say this stuff that we're talking about today is not real. But it is real. I hope you saw the promo for the show and you'll know what I'm talking about. Here it is. SkyNet wants our water. And that's kind of an inside joke for the people that know about the movie Terminator. And a lot of people know about the movie Terminator, but SkyNet was when AI basically ran wild and decided to take on the human race. Well, it's kind of what we're talking about today, folks. And we're going to be talking about it with Debbie Neustadt. Now, she's the member and lobbyist for the Sierra Club, a national water sentinel. She spent much of her adult life fighting for water affordability and water quality standards right out there on the front lines. And it's not an easy struggle, not an easy battle. And I'm delighted to have her on the show because today, what we're going to be talking about is not only those factors, but water availability. So let's click a couple of buttons here and say good morning to Debbie Neustadt. Hi, Deb.
Good morning. Thank you for asking me to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on. Like I said, it's under these peculiar circumstances. Our time is limited today, so I want to get right to this article. Now, this made worldwide news. A lot of people were shocked and surprised to see this. This is from the Associated Press, and people that are watching in video can see this image of this thing. This is very near me. I mean, I drive by this thing all the time. And I look at this and what in the hell is that thing? I mean, it's massive. It's huge. There's no signage. I mean, you won't ever know what it is just driving by it. A little investigation tells me that this is a Microsoft facility. I'm going to read this now. The cost of building an artificial intelligence product like ChatGPT can be hard to measure, Associated Press says. But one thing Microsoft-backed OpenAI needed for its technology was plenty of water pulled from the watershed of the Raccoon and Des Moines rivers in central Iowa to cool a powerful supercomputer as it helped teach its AI systems how to mimic human writing. I look at that and I go, oh my God, that's that movie that I'm talking about. That's SkyNet. Well, let's talk about another movie here and we'll ask Deb about this. Don't Look Up. Again, everybody saw this great movie. This is the Raccoon River. This is a recent photo here from Axios. And I tell everybody, don't look down. I mean, because it's running dry. I've lived here my entire life. I've never seen it anywhere near like this for so long. These rivers are becoming creeks. There just isn't the quantity of water. And of course, the quality oftentimes is deplorable. And like I said, Deb has been on the front line of this thing since day one. So, Debbie, you got to be ultra concerned, not only about what this is doing to our affordability and our quality of water, but also our quantity.
It's becoming a big issue because of climate change and drought. Droughts are increasing in places all over the world. And I know that here in Iowa, we don't usually think of not having enough water, but there continues to be examples of people drawing more water out of a resource that's dwindling because of drought. So this Raccoon River is one example. There are other places in Iowa that have had water quantity issues.
Yeah, and again, let me bring this thing up on screen because I mean, this is really it's a shocker. Don't look down. That image there again for people that are watching in video, but it's basically the Raccoon River looking more like a creek than a river. This is a water source for the city of Des Moines, and it's roughly 500,000 people surrounding it. And the Des Moines River would be another one, and it's much the same there. Let me bring this up again and read into this.
The Des Moines Waterworks has to put in boards to back up the river so that they can have the depth they need to draw in for drinking water.
My God. Associated Press says as they race to capitalize on a craze for generative AI. I barely understand what this stuff is, folks. Leading tech developers, including Microsoft, OpenAI, and Google, have acknowledged that growing demand for their AI tools carries hefty costs, from expensive semiconductors to an increase in water consumption. And it's mind-boggling here. Let me read. They're often secretive about the specifics. Few people in Iowa knew about its status as a birthplace of OpenAI's most advanced large language model, GPT-4, before a top Microsoft executive said in a speech it was literally made to cornfields west of Des Moines. Okay, I had to highlight this because this guy he's a top Microsoft executive. This guy probably, undoubtedly, makes millions of dollars a year. I got knock. I got news for this guy, Deb. Everything is next to a cornfield in the state of Iowa. What a dumbass thing to say. That's what the guy said. Building a large language model requires analyzing patterns across a huge trove of human written text. All of that computing takes a lot of electricity. And unfortunately, we're generating it with wind to a certain extent here in Iowa, a large extent, and generates a lot of heat. To keep it cool on hot days, data centers need to pump in water, often to a cooling tower outside its warehouse-sized buildings. That photo that I was talking about earlier. In its latest environmental report, Microsoft disclosed that its global water consumption spiked 34% from 2021 to 2022 to nearly 1.7 billion gallons, or more than 2,500 Olympic-sized swimming pools, a sharp increase compared to previous years that outside researchers tie to its AI research. Now, they're building them as fast as they can, says Steve Gare, who was the city's mayor when Microsoft came to town. Gare said that the company was attracted to the city's commitment to building public infrastructure and contributed a staggering sum of money through tax payments that support that investment. So, and this is Deb's world. I mean, I would call that a kind of a bribe, but I mean, it's, it's building recreational centers and stuff all over the city of West Des Moines. But here's what this guy says. Now, he used to be the mayor. I don't know who he is now. He says, but they were pretty secretive on what they're doing out there. He added, I highlighted that, Deb, because I looked at that and I said, my God, man, this is was kind of your job. You let them give you those taxes, and then you can't even look in on what they're doing. That's kind of what your role as a mayor is, but they've abdicated that for the mighty buck, it looks like.
These agreements are secret because of Microsoft wanting to protect their business. You have confidentiality agreements because Microsoft will say, well, if it's out in the public how much water we're using, that'll give our competition an idea as to what we have here. And just a comment about the cooling towers. So when you have cooling towers, you heat up the water and usually you put it back somewhere. So you got to make sure that the heat that you have from using it as a coolant doesn't impact the environment that you put it back into. I don't know if they're putting it back in the stream or putting it back in the groundwater. So you don't want to cook the fish.
Does it go in, super hot, or does it go in contaminated? I mean, wherever it goes, does the cooling process contaminate the water?
I wouldn't think so. I think it's a pretty closed system. So I know the best information about this is plants that use it with a coal fire plant. And so they do put it back in the stream. And of course, everybody has seen nuclear plant cooling towers. So water temperature is important.
I don't know whether if they're getting the water out of the stream and putting it back in the stream, or if they're getting it out of wells and putting it back in the stream. It's not exactly flooding anything, because this is what the streams look like. All right. I got one more graph here. I want to read this closer here. It's got a couple of highlights in it. For much of the year, and I highlighted that because this is becoming the new reality again. Much of the year is going to become more of the year, more of the year, more of the year, every year. Iowa's weather is cool enough for Microsoft to use outside air to keep the supercomputer running properly and vent heat out of the building. Only when the temperature exceeds 29.3 degrees Celsius, about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what I was getting at. I mean, we're reaching, is just in the past couple of days here, we've been over 90. We're setting new records regularly. So this water usage is not going to dissipate. It's going to continue to climb, the company said in a public disclosure. Now, that can still be a lot of water, especially in the summer. I get some of these numbers. It's unbelievable. In July 2022, the month before OpenAI says it's completed its training of GPT-4, Microsoft pumped in about 11.5 million gallons of water to its cluster of Iowa data centers, according to the West Des Moines Water Works. That amounted to about 6% of all the water used in the district, which also supplies drinking water to the city's residents. That's highlighted for a reason. To me, that was a head snapper. That was a jaw dropper, Deb, because I looked at that and I said to myself, my God, that is SkyNet. I mean, it's feeding itself to the point it's taking 6% of the water during that time frame for cooling of these centers. And then, like you say, what happens to the water after that? We don't know. We can't look in. They're not sharing. They're giving us money, and we're kind of paid to look the other way, it sounds to me like.
Yeah, I think I remember when the West Des Moines Drinking Water was applying for a permit to take out more water, and the Department of Resources let them. And it is a business model, and I know that the Department of Natural Resources is a little bit more hesitant to let people take water out of the state. But once it's used for a purpose inside the state, whether manufacturing or for an increase in population, I think it's pretty hard for the Department of Natural Resources to deny a public drinking water from being able to do that.
You know, Deb and I were talking before we came on the air. I've said this a lot on my show. People know this is a big thing with me. When I look at stories like this, it's one of those things where it's only natural. It's kind of like, unless you're a real curmudgeon and a real negative thinker, which I can be at times, it's only natural for people to look at something like that and think that, well, this is temporary. Things are going to get better. Things naturally improve. That may have been true at one point, maybe when I was a kid or something like that. But I got a feeling, Debbie, that these water use totals, and we're going to talk about contaminated water here coming up, that this is an issue, a problem, which is just going to continue to get worse, which is something that you've seen through the years, through the decades with Sierra Club.
Well, yeah. I'm sorry. And people do study this. We do have water quality monitoring. And so you can say that things are changing and more places have higher pollution than in the past. So you can say that. And I hope that the state does continue to fund the scientific research that's needed. And it hasn't. With change in the legislature, they've come across places that they think they can cut and reduce taxes. So we don't have as much water quality monitoring as we've had in the past.
Yeah, and the EPA is under fire. I had some information on them here just shortly. I talked to the people out in East Palestine, Ohio. My God, they just can't get any satisfaction from the EPA. Okay, as I mentioned at the onset here, I got to keep moving because our time with Debbie is limited. I'm going to go to our executive producer, well, next to my wife, I guess, Mary Knox. She's a frequent contributor to the program here. She's going to take us to the next segment here. She makes an excellent point, Debbie. She says CO2 pipelines could use as much as 500 million. That's not a typo by Mary Knox. 500 million gallons of water a year just in Iowa. So Iowa is being very foolish when it comes to water. It already takes 3 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of ethanol. And this is this quantity thing that we're talking about. And of course, quality of water after it's been used is another issue here. But Mary Knox is nailing it right there, Deb. Let me bring up this next article here to get us started into that segue. Now, this is from Bleeding Heartland. Laura Bellin is a frequent guest on my show. This is a nice contributor article by Nancy Dugan. She says Summit Carbon's annual water use in Iowa could be hundreds of millions of gallons. And that's what Mary was talking about. While testifying before the Iowa Utilities Board on September 5th, Summit Carbon Solutions Chief Operating Officer James Jimmy Powell outlined the company's need for large amounts of water at each of the sites identified as pipeline partners. Yeah, because that's what this thing is all about. Yeah, CO2 extraction, sure. Ethanol, yeah. Throughout the 5-state route proposed for a CO2 pipeline. We need the water supply at every plant, so we're working with individual plants. He said, according to the Summit Carbon website, the pipeline would connect to 13 ethanol plants in Iowa. So, Deb, what a tangled web we weave here. Go ahead and talk about that.
So this all started when we decided that there were technological fixes. And of course, you could argue that generating electricity is a technological fix through windmills and solar plants. But what this does, it says if we'll give you a tax break if you don't emit as much carbon dioxide. So the companies that knew this was coming proposed these pipelines, and we've always had a small amount of carbon dioxide pipelines. And so these entrepreneurs bought into the idea of getting the tax breaks, getting ethanol plants getting the tax breaks to take their carbon dioxide, instead of putting it in the air, putting it in a pipeline. So they say they're going to bury the carbon dioxide. But there are places that use carbon dioxide for fracking. So there's always the mistrust that in order to get the public to buy into it, they'll say they're going to bury it. And they do get permits. They do get permits to allow this stuff to be injected underground. And the geologists say that's okay. If you get it to the right formation, you can bury it. So that's the plan. That's the plan. And, I guess you'd have to ask the farmers that don't want their land dug up first. And that's what we're running into. It's my opinion that when we had the petroleum pipeline come through, people have seen what's happened when their farmland gets dug up. Just never goes back, that even though the companies say. And it's taken long enough for the farmers in Iowa to see the impact that digging up your farm and putting a pipe through does. There's and they don't want it. There's enough farmers that don't want their land dug up. The places it's already been done for the petroleum pipeline has continued to lose production.
Yeah.
They don't get the same amount of corn per acre that they do when they don't do this.
Yeah, and the point, and I would like to think that they're doing it, for safety reasons and concern for everybody else, but it could be simply, their own properties. But the way that I put it to people is, what's the point of paying property taxes and ownership and going around, talking about the fact that you're a steward of your land and a protector of your land and you've had it for generations and all that type of thing. If somebody can just come in and stick a pipeline in it and not reward you for doing that the way they should. They don't get enough money for it, obviously, because the land goes out of production, because the soil is degraded and won't grow anything. And that's kind of the circumstance that we're talking about. And what about the fact that you mentioned this carbon capture? I call it a Rube Goldberg concept. Scientists tell us that it won't work anyway, but these entrepreneurs, I think you called them, they're playing with house money. Deb. They're using tax dollars and incentives from the state. They're not really going to lose anything, even if this doesn't work, I don't think. And that's got to be kind of an insult to injury for people like you and the Sierra Club that struggle so mightily. I mean, you're asking people to donate to what you do on your website, and here's the other side being underwritten so mightily by state and federal government. Let me see here. Go ahead.
Well, again, it's a tax policy, and, getting rid of carbon dioxide is a good thing, but not at the taxpayer's expense. And also, we haven't even brought up eminent domain, have we?
Yeah, well, that's a little bit about what we were talking about. And the other thing about it is, that carbon, the opponents to this will tell you that they're going to use that stuff. It's going to go up in a pipeline up into North Dakota or something like that and be used to extract, the last cubic foot of gas and oil up there. And, it's not going to be taken care of the way that it should. Now we're running out of time. I knew this would happen. This is from Bleeding Heartland. This is kind of like what we talked about before. The scope of this thing, the scale, the median of 20 to 120 gallons of water per minute. That's the median. Powell's estimate of facility usage is 70 gallons of water per minute. Now, it's difficult to calculate with any precision just how much water Summit Carbon will use to capture CO2 at its 13 partner ethanol plants in Iowa. Hypothetically, assuming 13 plants are operational around the clock, 365 days a year, as Mary Knox said on that slide earlier, yields an estimated withdrawal rate of 478 billion. Wait a minute. Have I got that right? 478,296,000 gallons. Now that's per year. So this is an ongoing situation with this water quantity issue. And remember the graphics that we had up earlier. So here it is again in bulletized form. 70 gallons of water per minute multiplied by 13 ethanol plants equal to 910 gallons of water per minute. 910 gallons of water per minute multiplied by 1,400, the number of minutes in a day, is equal to 1,310,400 gallons of water per day. And then the 1,310,400 gallons of water per day multiplied by 365, the number of days in a year, is equal to that number that I talked about earlier. Okay, that's a lot of numbers, Deb, but that's just a lot of good, fresh water that we desperately need, and it's going to this Rube Goldberg enterprise.
Yeah, I haven't seen these numbers, and I think the way this is presented, you're talking about the amount of water that the ethanol plant uses, plus the amount of water that the carbon capture uses. So what would happen to the ethanol industry if they didn't get the tax breaks from using carbon capture? And I know that corn and soybeans are a backbone of our great economy here in Iowa, but you'll have people talk about how ethanol increases the amount of land used, and some of that land isn't the best land, and it could be used in conservation practices or conservation programs. So there's a lot to talk about when you talk about ethanol by itself, and then you combine it with a carbon capture, and there's better ways to get rid of the carbon in the atmosphere. Don't burn coal is the number one way to get rid of the carbon that comes into the atmosphere. Don't burn coal.
Plus the fact that the opponents again will tell you that ethanol is going to be outdated here very shortly anyway when it comes to automobile usage. I mean, this is a buggy whip industry that we're talking about. Okay, we're going to run out of time here in 5 minutes or less. I wanted to bring up a couple of things that I promoted because this was a jaw dropper, a shocker. We're going to talk about the Amazon here, but I tell everybody that in this Western hemisphere that we reside, I look at that Amazon rainforest. I call it the heartbeat for the hemisphere. Deb, and this reads, more than 100 dolphins were found dead over the past week in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil amid a severe drought and hot water temperatures, according to reports. This research facility, I'm not even going to try to read that, funded by the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation, found the dead dolphins in Lake Teffi over the past 7 days, CNN reported. Researchers believe the mass death is related to the Amazon's ongoing drought and recent triple-digit weather, according to CNN. And the highlighting here is mine. This past month in Teffe has seemed like a science fiction climate change scenario, going back to my open here about SkyNet with the cooling of these data centers. I mean, this really does look like something out of a movie. It looks like some of the opening scenes you'd see in a science fiction movie. What? The dolphins are dying? Yeah, the dolphins are dying. And shame on us, Deb. I tell people that we visited Hawaii. My wife swam with the dolphins. My God, what a uplifting experience that was. Anybody that's ever looked at dolphin in the eyes, and she has, I mean, you can see something going on there. And for us to be killing them with this climate catastrophe is beyond depressing. Let me read the last paragraph of this here, and because again, we're running out of time. So here's the other thing. People may, okay, let's say you don't care about trees, and you call people that like trees tree huggers. Let's say you call me a dolphin lover. How about this? Same article. Hundreds of thousands of people may be affected. Brazilian authorities said the drought may affect around 500,000 people. By the end of the year, many residents and natives are already struggling to access essential supplies, such as food and water. The main mode of transportation in the region is waterways, but the prolonged drought has caused historically low river levels. Man, is that word being overused? Historically. The drought has also impacted fishing, a means of sustenance for many riverside communities. Okay, so I know that you've got an eye all over the world, and certainly in this hemisphere, and certainly in the southern half of the hemisphere. Deb, what do you make of this?
We are so lucky that we have the economy that something that happens in one part of our country can be remedied by what's happening in the other parts. But drought with food shortages creates civil unrest. And we don't have that as much as other places do. So it's a big deal in other parts of the world. And that, can only eventually impact us too.
Yeah, it will. And then let me get to the last story here because we're running out of time. This is another one I promote after the Dolphins. New York City area paralyzed by heavy flooding. Now, this is out of the World Socialist website. I have this on my show once in a while. And one of the reasons is people watch MSNBC or CNN and they think they're left wing. Nah, you're not left wing. You're center right. I mean, you're probably in Ronald Reaganville. You look at sources like this and you discover what left wing's all about. And their perspective on this is interesting. A month's worth of rain fell in New York City Friday. At least 150 schools were flooded, in some cases with raw sewage. Massive traffic jams produced life-threatening situations across the city as storm drains overflowed, inundating city streets and trapping residents in their cars, particularly in Brooklyn and Queens. At least one hospital in Brooklyn was evacuated. Now, this made the news. A lot of people were aware of this, but they've got an angle here that's interesting. The city's government, run by the Democratic Party, which functions in the interest of the city's powerful real estate and financial magnates, has issued vacuous nostrums in the past regarding climate change, but has invested relatively few resources to addressing the problem. Now, the Democratic politicians routinely claim, and they're citing Democrats here because they're in charge of the government in New York City, claim that there is not enough money to fund vital infrastructure projects, despite the largest U.S. city being home to 107 billionaires and hundreds more multi-millionaires. By many yardsticks, it's the wealthiest city in the world. And that's where I said people were almost swimming, certainly waiting, running out of the subways to survive because of this flood. And these people that we're talking about, these billionaires and millionaires, they ain't in the subway. They're in the penthouses looking down on this. Again, it's a science fiction movie scene, but I know that a lot of this stuff does not come as real news to you, Deb.
7 inches of rain in New York City. That I can understand why everything was built not to do that. So as we get these extreme weathers of drought and flooding, our political power will be challenged.
And it certainly is. I'm going to put this URL up, and then we're going to let Deb go because she's got to go. Sierra Club, in the fight for fresh water, quantity and quality, go to sierraclub.org. And then here in the Heartland, if you want to just focus on the Hawkeye State /Iowa, I've got that up on the screen, sierraclub.org/Iowa. I'll give you the last word, Deb, before you run. Anything here that you want to say in closing before we leave this live line?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I'm a retired teacher, so I feel comfortable talking about these things. So thank you very much, George. I hope I can come back.
Yeah, oh, definitely, because we've again, we ran out of time today, and we've got too many other things to talk about. And I'll let Deb go, and then I want to tell people that again, there's the URL for the Sierra Club. Now, if you want to see people like Debbie Neustadt, get that German pronunciation of her name correct, with the Sierra Club. You don't get to see and hear her very much, or those folks' perspective on these issues. Go to podcastbygeorge.com and you'll be able to check it out. You can see the video live streams all the time, and you'll be notified when they release if you subscribe for free at Facebook and at YouTube at podcastbygeorge.com. Then after the show airs, the audio is stripped out, as they say, and it's uploaded to what used to be called iTunes, but it's Apple Podcasts now in an audio only format. Same thing with Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, and places where podcasts are heard. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.